TV audience. I'm looking over in the peanut gallery. I see no publics ready to make any comments, so we'll move over to the next agenda item. I introduced Andy Brockway, who will bring us up to date on Kelly's Corner. Are you all set to go? Okay.
Good evening. I'm Andy Brockway. I'm chair of the steering committee for the Kelly's Corner Improvement Initiative. Thank you for having me tonight. So on Saturday, I know Roland talked to you some about the infrastructure component of the project and the funding sources and the anticipated construction costs and the like. So I'm going to go over that again, but I also want to touch base on the zoning aspect of the project because that's also important. And that while you can think of those two things as being completely independent, they actually are designed to work together and create sort of an integrated approach to the project as a whole. There are a number of images in the packet tonight. I'm not going to go through all those in great detail given time, but they give you some sense of some of the design analysis that's going into ultimately the recommendations that we'll put forward. So we'll start again on the infrastructure piece and the sort of funding and anticipated costs for that. And the sort of first sheet with the sort of pink heading on it gives you a sort of a generalized spreadsheet of where we have been, where we're going. Top line item talks about the existing study to date, which is sort of the master plan analysis and conceptual plan, and that was funded in 2013, and it ultimately has yielded what, in terms of Mass Department Transportation, design level of a 10%, and the scope of the work of the anticipated scope of work of the project has increased a significant amount from when it was initially envisioned. And so to get from where we are now to funding that project, there's a series of, or there's a basic process that we need to go through, and that most of the funding is going to come through, if not all the funding in a sense for construction, will come through the so-called TIP process, which is the Transportation Incentive Program. And so in order to be part of that Transportation Incentive Program, which we will have to create a 25% design based on Mass Department Transportation standards. And once you have achieved that 25% design, and as long as that's then accepted, you can get on to the construction program schedule for them. Basically, at that point, the other condition along with that is not only do you have to have a sort of design that's worthy of their approval, but you have to, as a town or an entity, make a commitment, have made a commitment to completely funding the design all the way through. So in order to get to that point from the 10% or so where we're at now, there are two components of it. One is to get to that 25% standard, and that is on the order of $318,000 as an estimated design cost. The other then is to go from there to completing the design, and that's on the order of another $438,000. So, and all this includes a contingency in that in terms of the estimated design costs. And these design costs, the estimates are coming based on the Massachusetts Department of Transportation's sort of standardized scope of services. So that's what we would be coming to town meeting in April for, is that $756,000, and that would fund the design all the way through to 100%. So what's that get you? Then we have to actually sort of build, well, we have to design the project and have it built. In the construction phase, or the estimate now is on this order of $9 to $12 million for the overall construction. The consultant has a basic estimate of about $8 million in their scope. And that doesn't include dollars for construction work currently on private property. There will be a change of the right-of-way. We're increasing the right-of-way, and so there will be some work that is now currently on private property. The other aspect is that even though the consultant has about an $8 million fee or cost estimate, with the planning department and us as a committee, we're going to say, based on past experience and potentially inflation, we anticipate the project being probably more than that $8 million. The important thing to know about the TIP program, though, is that they will take into account this inflation or escalation of cost. So that if you design a project today, for argument's sake, that costs $5 million, and it takes 5 years to build, to get to construction, and the inflation cost then is, for argument's sake, $1 million, they will generally cover that inflation cost. So the program itself, the TIP, again, it's based on federal and state dollars. It would take about 5 years from the start through design and the approval process. The other aspect then in terms of larger costs, there are acquisition costs because again we're expanding the right-of-way in certain places. The amount of that is unknown. There's sort of a back-of-the-envelope idea about it, but there's so many variables right now, it's hard to make a definitive statement of what it is. The funding source for that would be the town of Acton. Because ultimately the TIP program is using federal funds, there are requirements in the federal rules about negotiating when sort of for acquisition, let's say, of private property. So you have to get to a 75% design in order to start that process. Important thing here is that the town wouldn't be in a position of outlaying funds for those acquisitions until that point. And if you're at that point, if you're at 75% design, the project's basically a go. So even at 25%, there's not an absolute, it's not absolutely confirmed that it's going to go, but there's a very high probability that even if you're approved at the 25% level, it's going to go forward. So, an important note in the past, I think when it came up, we had talked about some of the funding sources coming from Mass Works. And given the scope of the increased scope of work, the idea is that all the project would be funded through the TIP program. And so, I mean, there's some benefit to that in the sense of you've only got one funding source you're trying to deal with, as opposed to you getting two to get you the same dollar amount, or close to the same dollar amount. So that's a basic overlay, again, in terms of what the sort of infrastructure is and what sort of the anticipated costs are. And I can certainly go into that in more detail, or I can try to. Just backing up for a second on the imagery on this page here, this gives you a sense of the overall scope of the infrastructure. To sort of orient yourself somewhat on this drawing, down here, that's Kmart. Here's the Parker Damon. Over here is the Roach Brothers. Here's the Bolodrome. So you're going up 27, here's 111. So that gives you sort of a full idea of extent of the work. The next image is just sort of a blow-up diagram, a little bit more around the intersection. And then ultimately the third image, the perspective, gives you another sense of what's going on. And so part of the project, or in the infrastructure piece, is to try and follow the complete streets policy that the town has adopted. And so not only will there be improvements in terms of the way traffic moves about, so for example, left-hand turn lanes in a series of places to allow traffic to sort of make that turn, yet other traffic to move past. There'll be bicycle lanes and also general sidewalk and general infrastructure improvements. So, I mean, again, without going into great detail, that's sort of, there'll also be a new traffic light at the top of what's called Community Lane or Way, which is the road that is going through the Edens sort of development.
That light would be on 27?
Yeah, the light will be on 27. There had been some discussion, I know even, I think, with the current CVS development about putting a light down there. I think, I mean, the town wasn't directly involved in this discussion, but that when the private developers went and talked to the DOT at that point wasn't interested in sort of pursuing that. But the idea would be there'd be one up on 27. Right now, Community Lane, Community Way, whatever you want to call it, is actually owned by Edens. And so in order to sort of do some of the infrastructure improvements there that are associated with the light, et cetera, in order to use federal state money on that, the town has to acquire the Community Way. So that would be that would fall under the acquisition costs there. Let's switch gears for a second and talk a little bit about the zoning aspect of it. And there are three basic pieces to the zoning that we're looking at. One is this notion of having a master plan development and a sort of review and permitting process associated with that. The other is that there will be some updates to sort of the dimensional requirements, setbacks, density, building heights, those type of things. And the third is some change in allowable use. And so I can go through that a little bit. The first diagram you're looking at here, this one with the sort of orange and blue on it, that's a diagram that describes what is the existing conditions right now in Kelly's Corner in terms of the zoning, the floor area ratio. And the floor area ratio is essentially, in its most simplest terms, it's a percentage of how much of the building there is, counting the number of floors and how much square footage you get in relationship to the overall site. And so, for example, if you had a floor area ratio of 1 and you had a 1-story high building, it would cover the entire site. If you had a 2-story high building and you had half the coverage, you'd still have a floor area ratio of 1. So, in any event, what we see in this is that, and it's divided between a 0.20 FAR, between 0.2 and 0.4, and then over 0.4, and that's based on current zoning in Kelly's Corner. So that right now, by right, you're allowed to have up to 0.2 FAR. You can go to 0.2 to 0.4 if you get a special permit, and there's some conditions with that in terms of the way the buildings, whether you have a gable roof, things like that. And just simply over 0.4 there, as you see on the diagram, there actually isn't anything for one second we thought there was, but there isn't actually anything over 0.4. What's interesting is that you see then, and this doesn't mean that, so for example, on the Kmart site, and I think maybe even on Roach Brothers, I'm not sure, one of the reasons why they're over 0.2 is not because they went through a special permit process, but because they came in before this requirement. That was built before this requirement. In any event, what you see is that about half the sites are at 0.2, which is the by right, and about half are at the 0.2 to 0.4. What we're suggesting is actually, so there's a master plan development process where if you have, let me go actually to the next page. So if we go to this page here, what we're suggesting in order to partly encourage redevelopment of Kelly's Corner, partly to encourage development that will be more amenable to creating, in essence, public space, using buildings to sort of create space more continuous. I mean, right now in Kelly's Corner, there are a whole series of buildings that really don't work together to sort of define a street front, for example, or define civic plazas or anything of that nature. And so what we're suggesting is that you can enter, if you have a site that has 50,000 square feet or 300 lineal feet of frontage, you can enter into this master plan process. And what that master plan process will allow you to do is have greater density, greater allowable building heights, and also allowable use. And so you actually be able to have residential, mixed-use residential component only in those master plan development process. And so why is it 50,000 and why 300 lineal feet? And what are the outcomes? And by the way, on the next page is on this diagram here, on the next page, we looked at 50,000 square feet and 100 lineal feet of street frontage. And just on the street frontage, this is partly where zoning relates back to infrastructure. One of the aspects about Kelly's Corner in terms of the overall level of congestion is that the actual volume of traffic, number of cars going through Kelly's Corner now has not increased since the 90s. Yeah, maybe even slightly decreased, which it seems to be, from a perception level, counterintuitive. But that's what the traffic counts come up with. And part of the reason what you're seeing is so the volume and the number of cars might have actually stayed about the same. But traffic has gotten worse, and so they're related, but those are two different ideas. And partly the reason about with traffic is that, as any of us have experienced, let's say you're coming down 27 and you go through the light, and somebody decides to turn left to get into the Bolodrome or to get into Bueno Sano or what have you. That starts to back up traffic, and there's a curb cut, there's an access curb cut for Bueno Sano, there's one for the Bolodrome, there's one for the Orange Leafs, that whole development. And you can go all through Kelly's Corner, not to just suggest those places, but. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is reduce those number of curb cuts, either the overall width of them or the number that exist, so that you get fewer turning conditions. That ultimately will have an impact on the way traffic moves through Kelly's Corner. And so that gets back to the idea about street frontage. And so in this original diagram, the one with the 50,000 square feet acreage and the 300 lineal feet of frontage, when you look at this diagram, the ones in green, dark green, those three sites have both the required frontage and acreage to enter into this master plan process. So right now, under current conditions, those are the only three that would be able to enter into this process. Right? The idea would be that, the hope would be that other smaller parcels would then have an incentive to aggregate. And you want them to aggregate in part because you don't want to have a whole other series of little tiny buildings with a lot of parking and curb cuts and stuff. We're trying to get more of a sense of having a continuous street front. We're not going to be downtown Concord. That's not achievable for a number of reasons. But there are things about that idea about having more or less of a continuous street front that makes sense for any town. So in this diagram, the pink areas are ones that don't have the required frontage and acreage. They could hopefully, over time, perhaps aggregate with other parcels to sort of get into this master plan development. So just quickly on the next page at the 100, which shows 100 lineal feet, you'll see that there are actually more parcels that would have qualified. So on just below where 27 and 111 meet in the sort of southeast or the lower right-hand corner, for example, there are more parcels there that would have qualified under 100 lineal feet. Part of the problem is also that, we can't get into sort of trying to micromanage and solve each parcel. We're trying to develop a policy that, in broad strokes, will sort of work for the overall Kelly's Corner. So sometimes there are parcels that you would wish would change, but perhaps might not immediately be within this program. But in general, that's the intent behind what we're proposing.
So these are two separate proposals for a master planning concept, right?
Right. Well, what we're proposing is not the 100 lineal feet, but the 300. But I'm showing you the 100 lineal feet as sort of why 300 versus something else. It gives you a basis just sort of to understand what the value of the 300 is.
The point being that if you did just 100, for instance, and you don't have the incentive for developers to aggregate, you sort of create a cohesive strategy and cohesive law, basically.
Yeah. And again, we got to be careful not to try and micromanage it too much and worry about this particular lot or that particular lot. I would say, well, let's go on to the next piece, which is sort of these diagrams here, and they're sort of labeled street front buildings. And so these are sections, these are sections as if you were at a building, you were to sort of cut a slice through them and look sort of down one side or the other. And what they are representations of what's under the existing zoning and what will also be existing and proposed by right zoning, as well as what would be under the proposed master plan development zoning. And so the image on the left shows pitched roof, and that's under current and proposed zoning. The image on the far right is a flat roof, also proposed under current proposed zoning, and the two in the middle are ones that would be under if you qualified and decided to go through the master plan development. What you see in the darker blue means that only commercial is allowed. The upper, or the yellow basically means that commercial and or residential is allowed. And so when you look at the diagram, you see that on street front buildings, and so those are any building that's within 30 feet of the right-of-way under the new sort of updated dimensional requirements, that under the master plan development, the ground floor still has to be commercial, but the upper floors could be residential. So here's where the change in allowable use comes in. It's only allowed in the master plan development. It's not allowed by right to the housing, the residential component. The other thing is that you see that there are higher allowable roof peaks or heights, should I say, under the master plan development. So under by right, you're allowed, currently and under proposed, you're allowed 36 feet to the height of the roof. And there's measurement, the ways you calculate that for a pitch roof versus a flat roof, but basically that's 36 feet. Under the proposed master plan development, what we're saying is to go to 40 feet on a sort of flat roof with a vertical wall, and on a pitch roof, it would be 45 feet to the mean height of the roof, and a maximum of 40 to the sidewall. So you're going to go up a little bit in the master plan development from what's now 4 feet on a flat roof, upwards of potentially 9 feet. No, yeah, potentially 9 feet on the master plan. There's also a difference, though, between then street front buildings versus buildings that are farther in on the site when it comes to master plan development. So the next image, this one here, this image describes only in buildings that would be in the master plan development. And it starts on the left with what would be on the street front, and then the two in the middle are sort of interior buildings off from the street front, and then on the right again we're back to a street front. The other aspect is what we're saying is that on an interior building, and I forget what the exact definition of the interior building is, but it's not on the street front, your allowable use can be anything. Well, sorry, any of the underlying basic uses already, so that you could have residential on all floors, or you could have commercial. It's not a requirement on the interior buildings that you have commercial. it still is a requirement on the street front buildings that you have commercial on the ground floor. And the idea behind that is that you don't really want to have residential, which by elements by nature is more private and doesn't really have a sense of sort of activating street life. So it's okay if it's on the interior of the site, but what we're really trying to do is activate the street. And so we're still requiring that commercial, except for in particular conditions, would be required on the ground floor. Very quickly, in a nutshell, that's some of the things that are going on. The master plan development process itself would involve several reviews of designs. They would look to the design review board for some rigorous input on that. While there are some dimensional requirements that will apply to many master plan development, you're also, just because you meet those dimensional requirements doesn't mean the project's can be approved. Whereas that's different than essentially that's different compared to a by right condition, where if you meet the dimensional requirements and other basic requirements, there's no real reason to say the project can't go forward. There'll be a far more sort of rigorous review based on the aesthetics of the project and how it fits in with the overall ideas. So, that's quickly some of the things that we're working on. Ken?
Can I make one comment? That is that in coming up with these different building heights, we can't imagine how many meetings we talked about this in the proposed corner steering committee. But first and foremost, at least the starting point wasn't. Sorry. The starting point for these was informed by some very rigorous pro formas that were done as part of the consulting team that we had, services that we had, that basically said sort of this is how much development you'll need to allow in order for a developer to make it worth it for a developer to redevelop a site. So that's something we can have to consider because we don't have just perfectly empty sites. And so there's a calculation there. And then also, I don't know if you wanted to mention anything about Stop and Shop. I know Roland sort of alluded to it on Budget Saturday.
Well, I think people have heard in various formats that Stop and Shop, which is the owner of the Kmart property, and Kmart leases it through Stop and Shop, they have shown recent interest in redeveloping that site, and we've had some quick conversations with them, and they have a developer on board for the moment. I don't know whether that's ultimately who they would go with, but there's active interest, at least on their part, in taking a look at redeveloping it. Obviously, we don't know all the details. Their lease is certainly one of the sticking points. But that sort of touches on another idea. I think one of the concerns perhaps people have is that all of a sudden tomorrow Kelly's Corner is going to change overnight. And that we could enact the zoning in theory in April, and then the infrastructure again, that'll take about 5 years or so if that's approved. Even at that rate, you can anticipate, some development might take quickly, other development might take 25 years. We don't control the private property. What we can do is sort of guide them and give them some incentive to sort of develop in a way that we hopefully holistically benefits the town. But it's not as if tomorrow all of a sudden there are going to be 300 new buildings or so.
Questions? Bob?
The construction cost of $9 to $12 million, do I understand you correctly that that's essentially an escalator once you get on it, eventually you'll get your money?
Once you get on it, eventually you'll get your money? Is that- Yes. Well, my understanding is that once you have been approved at the 25% and you're on the so-called construction schedule, if there's escalation in cost, they will account for that, and so that will get funded fully. So the town will not be left on the hook if there's a significant escalation in.
And not on the hook for not getting any money whatsoever because they decided they didn't like it 5 years from now.
No, that is...
All right.
The way, I guess, I mean, we have some risk here. The risk, I guess, I would say is that there are design fees that are a risk in a sense. We could do the design and not get approved. We have a good relationship with DOT. We understand the process. They have interest in this project because not only is 111 a state road, but the interchange of Route 2, I mean, they've even asked us to quickly take a look at that, although I guess that didn't really go anywhere. So those are some of the reasons for thinking the project might go forward. But the design, if you were to think about it in terms of what risk we're at, I'd say the design fees potentially. But beyond that, you could say something maybe about the acquisition costs just because they're unknown. But we're not going to put out money for any acquisition until we're approved. So,
My only other comment is, as I look at all the trees on your design pictures, all I think about is the intersection of Central Street and 27 by the Unitarian Church, where you can't see 27 until you're practically in it. And I worry that you've got trees that are going to do exactly the same thing.
yeah, I think they overpopulated. I think that what we now have in the updated zoning is to say something on the effect of you have to have a tree once every 45 feet, lineal feet, something like that, which is more than what this is shown.
Mr. Chairman?
Jason, go ahead.
This is a follow-up. This is actually a corollary to what Bob just discussed. I just want to make sure I understand the order of operations of what needs to happen. If I understand properly, the master plan and the zoning changes, are those interchangeable ideas, or are they two separate things? So my understanding is we have to do the master plan, get the master plan approved, or is that already approved? The zoning changes, then the dollars for the planning and design. Then we need to get buy-in from TIP, and then the money for the construction comes out, but the money for the construction would come out of TIP, correct? That's two questions, sorry. Both order of operation and...
So the sequence of sort of funding would be, and funding and operations would be that right now we have developed the master plan, concept plan that's defined the scope of work. So the scope of work's not really going to change. I mean, maybe here or there, but basically...
Andy, can I interrupt for a minute? Do you mean this master plan special permit thing that he...
Yes.
Okay, all right, okay. So the master plan special permit is a piece of the zoning amendments that will come to town meeting. In one sense, you could say all of zoning is entirely independent of the infrastructure. I mean, you could make that argument if you wanted to, and in effect, the town could vote for the complete zoning and not vote at all for the funding of the infrastructure, right? That's a possibility. We're not necessarily recommending that. We're certainly not recommending that. But that's a possibility. You could do it that way. What we're suggesting is that ultimately TIP funding still is interested in sort of having a holistic sort of design so that you're not just doing pure infrastructure, but that you're doing infrastructure for some larger sense of sort of making a place. And they have in the past expressed, favor on projects that have some sort of bigger sense of what it's going to be, and that would include, in this case, for us at least, allowing some of the sort of residential component in the mass going forward. So the master plan development piece of it is purely a subset of overall zoning. And so if you don't approve the master plan, or the zoning, residential will not be a part of Kelly's Corner. So, and then to follow on from that, you're...
Just a reiteration that the town is potentially in jeopardy for the first $1,025,000 in design charges. And then this 9 to 12 you're talking about is coming straight out of the Mass TIP eventually.
Well, we've already committed the 275 or so. That's already done and gone. That's what we're doing now, is the 275. So we're at risk, let's say, for argument's sake, for 750,000 and change.
Steve?
Sure. Couple questions. Does your 5-year time horizon count any queue time or wait time on the tip list? I know it can be considerable.
My understanding is that's an average estimate about the length of time. Yes, so that we would get in, you'd be on the 25% before 5 years, but that the overall process and working way through would be about 5 years.
So
Yes.
5 years. In 5 years, in theory, we can start whatever infrastructure construction we need to start.
Right.
Second question, I guess a pessimist would look at these numbers and say, we spent $275,000 to find out 10% of the problem, and found that the problem was now 3 or 4 times the original cost estimate. How sure are we when we spend the other 90% of the design money that we won't run into, maybe not as big a multiple, but rapidly we get into big dig level numbers if for every 10% of design we quadruple the cost of the project?
Well, it's interesting that you referenced the big dig, because this is in many ways completely different. It's not going to turn into the big dig. One of the reasons the big dig, one of the things that happened here is that, yes, the scope increased significantly, way beyond what was originally anticipated. There are unknowns still, but nothing on the order of the big dig, partly because we're not going underground. We're not going underground. We don't have it. The complexity of the project, and I don't mean to talk about the big dig, but
It's probably a bad analogy.
But there are, we started with a consultant estimate of about $8 million, and we're factoring on top of that money to try and be conservative. There will be some unknowns that come up. Are they ones that are going to be so, who knows exactly what they are, but are they likely to be so incredibly different than what we understand? Not so much.
But how did we get from $3 million to $9 million?
Yeah.
Because frankly, one way of looking at this, Andy, is, hey, you asked for 275 to get us 3, and you didn't do that. Now you're asking for another $750,000 to get us 9.
Right.
Why do you have more credibility now than you did then?
Well, I don't know exactly how the initial scope was defined. I think through the process, we looked at three choices, let's say, a min, median, and max solution to the process. And what we're actually proposing is probably in the medium solution. And we could do, in theoretic, we could do a minimum solution, fix up some sidewalks, do some striping, maybe fix up a street light, things like that. But it became such that doing something like that, while helpful, won't fundamentally alter the way Kelly's Corner is. We could go much farther and sort of think about either 2 interchanges or think about 2 lanes in each direction, things that I don't think anybody would be acceptable. But to go back to your question, it's hard for me to tell you exactly why the scope was sort of stated the way it was originally. I would say that given what the scope is defined at, does the construction cost seem in line with that? Probably, you know.
Can I answer that also?
Do you know the answer?
Because I was the one pitching for the 275, so...
My apologies, Andy, I should have directed it to Margaret.
Well, no, I mean, he answered it well, too, in the sense that, you know, there's things, the scope increased, and we also, you know, sort of still chose the medium choice there. But I would say that the way that that scope was initially defined was just simply done in-house. So we didn't have any experts, right? So we just had to sort of rely on, you know, people in-house that work for the town, basically, that sort of did, no, not that that's bad, but they're just, we didn't have the expertise, and we didn't have the expertise, and, I mean, this is what the 275 paid for, right, is to get that expertise, to really look at it in a very, very detailed way. So I feel very confident that the number is not going to explode from here, because this is what the 275 paid for, is to get that expertise, which we didn't really have at that point. We just sort of had to make a good, you know, our best sort of estimate based on the expertise we did have in-house. And again, you know, we might have thought that that scope, as Andy said, was sort of that lower level of, you know, things that we could do, but we just felt like doing that lower level that would maybe only cost, you know, sort of $3 million would sort of be penny wise and pound foolish. So.
And Mr. Chair, if you'll indulge me one more. Actually, this is a comment. An unknowable number is not a good thing to go with town meeting. I would suggest that since we have an excellent assessor, we could get an approximate value of what we'll have to take by multiplying the assessed value of the property by about 120%, probably. Because you'll have to get 2 appraisals and blah, 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 blah. It won't be exactly what you have it assessed for, but it won't be too far out of that mark. So, you know, I don't know what the number is, but it would be best to know it, rather than say, well, there's a potential in 5 years we're going to have to spend something, and we don't know what it is. Makes people very uncomfortable.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it would be nice if we had a plan that goes from here to here. Like, where specifically would these residential sites be, and how many? What is the population?
He can't answer that because there's absolutely no commitment on the part of the private owners of that land to make any of these changes.
At what point in this project do we bring in a developer? Is there any developer interest? And will this project move at the pace of the federal government or the state and federal highway department? Whatever they move, how they move is how we move.
Mr. Chairman, respectfully, we don't get to bring in a developer. Mr. Chairman, respectfully, we don't get to bring in a developer. We are making all these changes in the hopes that a developer will then choose to come and play in our sandbox.
Right.
I think that's,
That's the point of zoning.
well,
That is the point of zoning.
Zoning, yes, $1 million.
And that's partly why we talked to developers, to see if this was sort of, is this something that is interesting to them? Is it something attractive to them, or did they just say no way?
well,
Right?
is there,
And
is this?
that was the point, and that was why we did these very detailed pro formas, so that we could understand what would be attractive to developers.
Well, then the question
So-
is this attractive to developers?
Well, as Andy said, we've talked, we've talked, just in casual talks, not to sort of make agreements with, but with Stop and Shop, and they have interest. And that particular lot is the most sort of subject to change right now, if you look at it for a variety of reasons. And so I think that's actually really exciting and great news.
All right. Yeah, well, sorry.
Doug, you must have 2 cents.
Yeah, as some of you know, I've been opposed to this thing from the beginning, but primarily because I felt that there was a lack of real estate expertise involved in the team from day one. There were people who were earnest and concerned and willing to dedicate a tremendous amount of their time on behalf of Acton, and I certainly support that. But, on the diagram, for example, the Roach Brothers Plaza is one of the most successful anchored strip centers in this part of Massachusetts. And the Not Your Average Joe's strip center is very successful. It's not in the same order of magnitude because it's not anchored. But, to be talking about how this is part of the equation is just blue sky. It's not part of the equation. It's never going to be part of the equation. I mean, certainly not within the 25-year window that's been brooded about. I think that if you look at the diagram, the next green parcel is the brand-new TD Bank and the brand-new CVS, and something could happen, I suppose, on the parcel that's the daycare center. But those two parcels, the first two parcels I mentioned, nothing's going to happen on them for a very long time, so they're done. And so the point that I've been trying to make from the beginning is that you have to look at the rest of the reels, just these three chunks, and say, okay, you got gas stations with sites loaded with gas tanks that are very expensive to turn over, and all the real estate in this section, with the possible exception of Bueno Isano and maybe the bowling alley, is performing real estate, and it's performing at numbers which are consistent with commercial real estate all over our area. So in that sense, there's nothing wrong with it. It's aesthetically not as pleasing as we would all like it to be sure, but as far as the real estate is concerned, there's nothing wrong. So consequently, I remember the people from ULI sitting over there squirming around when they realized that the project that they'd been asked to opine on was not blighted. And they came out and they said, well, you don't really have any blight. There's really nothing wrong with this. And so they said, you could do some things with trees, and maybe you could open up pathways across Route 27 to access the school campus and get more kids walking back and forth between the schools and the not your average Joes and so on. But they really were at a loss to be able to say beyond traffic engineering that there was anything that they could do. And that is that collection of people at ULI are the brightest real estate people in the country. And in Boston, they're among the best of the ULI chapters in the country. So it was sort of embarrassing to see that happen. I think that the basic problem with having to go up 4 stories is that you have to create additional financeable, leasable area in order to take account of the fact that you've got to buy a performing piece of real estate, tear it down and scrape the site, and build it all over again. And you hope that when you get done, you're going to have a project which will pay more rent than the real estate that was already there, which was performing at market. So the only way you can improve on that is to go up another 2 stories, 1 or 2 stories. And so this becomes an exquisitely difficult project to do. And I think that the key all along has been the Kmart parcel, and I have been hectoring the town to get married to Kmart and find out, or not Kmart, Stop and Shop and find out what's going on, what their intentions are, how we can help them, and so on. And for 3 years running, I was the only guy who talked to Stop and Shop about their real estate, because I used to be their landlord, and they would take the call. But in the meantime, they've gone ahead and done a deal with the 110 restaurant, which wipes out what looks like about 25% of the sight lines on the parcel for the Kmart store from 27. Which, if anybody brought me that deal and said, hey, we're going to knock off this little piece here, and we're going to wipe out all the sight lines from the intersection, I would have said, are you out of your mind? It's not something that enhances the value of the big parcel where Kmart is. And finally, you get into the question of what are you going to put in the surplus space that you create when you create residential in which the buildings are 3 and 4 stories tall and overlook an ocean of cars? Who's going to want to live there? What will the demographics be of the residents who take up these apartments here? And are we not creating an invitation for somebody to come into a whole bunch of 40B that we would really prefer not to have, just as was done just down the street?
Well, you could do 40B now.
I beg your pardon?
Couldn't you do 40B now?
With the parcels performing, the owners are not inclined to sell. Whoever's going to do a 40B has to be able to take a breakable piece of land, take it off some of the other project pieces. So, for example, somebody could come in and do what Ann Chang calls Toothache Hill here, where the dental building is. And you could do a fair amount of 40B in there, and it probably wouldn't hurt us visually, but it just adds a burden to the schools and creates a lot of sort of demographic uses that are very different than what we're accustomed to.
Right. But if I may, if we go back to Kmart site, you could do a 40B there now, right?
They could, but a 40B wouldn't be as profitable as a commercial development. Hence, their interest in partnering with Win Stanley and then coming to talk to us.
Right, so I'm not sure how what we're proposing would affect the wanting to do a 40B one way or the other.
Well, how many units, let's get into it. How many units do you think you're going to create?
I mean, I don't
The
know.
last 2 pages here.
Yeah.
Is this 100 units of new housing, 200 units of new housing?
I don't have those numbers. I mean,
Well, I mean, the orders of magnitude, I think, are important, because in order to create enough value in the newly created space overhead to cover the cost of knocking down the existing buildings and rebuilding them in a new configuration so that you can lease them at numbers that are presumably higher than market, that space has to be substantial.
right. So part of the process in the study that we just did was to have a real estate and finance specialist, whatever you want to call them, do a series of economic financial analyses that looked at these aspects of what they thought the redevelopment of those sites would be, what it would entail, nominally how many units you could get on those sites. I mean, we do have numbers for those things. So, I mean, I don't have those with me tonight, but going back to your other point, just in terms of space, yeah, the Eden Brothers, Roach Brothers site, yeah, that'd be a long-term idea. The sort of CVS, who knows? I mean, they could enter into this if they wanted to now. I mean, they're sort of trying to figure out what they're going to do. And trying to, again, in terms of the process, backing up, we have talked to Stop and Shop as much as we can. As far as the other sites, yes, it's not easy, but I'm not sure what the downside would be to try and think about having those sites aggregate. I mean, you can talk about it in terms of sort of whether they will or not realistically from a sort of real estate financial perspective, but from a sort of town planning idea, you want those sites to aggregate. You don't want that to be, you don't want it to sort of end up being like this. And so yes, you can be financially successful, commercially viable, and still have what's not considered a very nice place overall, which I think describes Kelly's Corner. I mean,
And it's underutilized.
it's
under potential.
Talking about above the second story,
right.
Or just all that whole Kmart
So-
parking lot that's not used.
Kmart parking lot is code, right?
Well, you can meet code in different ways. I mean, that Kmart parking lot's a perfect example of something that, having a building that far set back from the street, creating no sort of street edge, not encouraging at all any sort of sense of pedestrian movement within the town, not sort of activating the street front in any way to sort of gain any of that sort of public amenity. I mean, there are different ways, again, you can sort of meet dimensional requirements, but is that really sort of, part of the zoning is not just simply to encourage development, but underlying it is to sort of create a better sense of a town center, town planning. Yeah, so sure, there are pure financial ideas behind zoning, but I mean, the larger sense, I think, is to, again, sort of do that development in a way that it sort of has bigger sort of gains to it, so.
So I would just say a couple things. So, right, on the point of when the people came in and spent, one day looking at it, they said it's not blight. It's not blight, but it's underutilized. And I think people in town particularly feel very passionately about the space and really don't like it. And, I can't tell you how many people ask me constantly, like, can't we get rid of Kmart, or whatever it is about Kelly's Corner that they don't like. And so what we're sort of what the Kelly's Corner Steering Committee is trying to present to the town is really an option. Do we want it to be the way it is now with Kmart and a huge parking lot? And allow sort of one-off developments, which is what has happened in the past, which has sort of gotten us where we are today? Or do we want to have, put a stake in the ground and have it seat at the table in the planning of something bigger and better and nicer and more attractive for a commercial town center. And I think that's the choice. So if we want to sort of keep it the same, even though it won't stay the same, because there'll be things that happen on one-off type of situations. People made a big fuss over the CVS going in, and that went in under the current zoning. So I think that's really what we have to think about and evaluate as we're thinking about the zoning piece. Now, we're the finance committee, so zoning isn't really our expertise. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a say in it. I think we absolutely should, and it's a very big part of it. But certainly, you know, the piece that's the $756,000 is something that we definitely need to engage on.
Jason?
As a follow-up to that, Margaret, is it not the case that making the zoning changes in April and taking a wait-and-see approach of, do we get any actual interest from developers? Do we get any sign that there's going to actually be changes that might actually merit and need such changes to the roads? So before we commit to undergoing, so $750,000, whether you feel that's a lot or a little, we can definitely discuss that. But before we commit that money and commit to the 5-year plot process and commit to the disruption that will be these changes when these changes go into place, because you think Charter Road is bad now, wait until it's under construction for 6 months minimum, a year. So would it not also make sense to recommend or move forward on the zoning changes and take a wait-and-see approach to the rest of these changes? Because I think marrying the two of them together may not actually be merited here, because I don't see, I see if we have a zoning change and it actually generates the level of developer interest that is being discussed, the amount of time that it's going to take to put in the new building can be concurrent with the amount of time that we do if we choose to do what we choose to make changes to the road. Or is the argument being, we're already in for $250,000, let's put in the rest of the $750,000 and get these roads changed in the hopes that that makes it even more attractive? Is there a return on investment of spending $1 million in design funds to go get this money from the state or TIP, sorry, for the road changes? Is that going to be what breaks the camel's back towards, or is the added impetus, rather than break the camel's back, let's use a positive image, is that going to be the added impetus to get the developers to come in and make the types of changes and the types of designs that we're looking for? Or would we just be better off making the zoning change and see if anyone comes?
I mean, I think they're related, but they're separate things. I think we could do that. We could just do the zoning, and that could happen at town meeting. People might say, well, you know what, we want to make the zoning changes, but we really don't want to pay for this. It's just not worth it for us to change the roads and sidewalks and really make a nice, sense of place. We just don't care about that.
Respectfully, it's not a nice sense of place until Kmart is gone, right? So, I mean, let's be honest, putting some nice benches on the corner does not make this a walkable, nice place.
I actually think that infrastructure changes would make a huge difference, even if Kmart stayed. However, the one thing that we do know is we already have developer interest. So we do know that. And we have developer interest in the lot that is actually the most susceptible to change. And frankly, I think the ones that most people want changed. So I think that's really good news. So we actually do know that, which is the Kmart lot.
We have interest, but Stop and Shop still owns it.
They're the ones that are interested.
Do we have any insight as to what they're planning on doing?
We have nothing confirmed. There's conversations, but we don't have anything. If I may answer your question a little bit, the fundamental issues with the infrastructure exist whether you change zoning or not. The traffic issues, the congestion, all those things aren't going to be really terribly impacted by zoning. Certainly not in any immediate short-term run.
Right.
So what's fundamentally driving the infrastructure improvements are going to exist regardless of the changes to zoning. I would say is to some level you would rather get the infrastructure improvements out in front so that you and sort of the public can start to try and define what are the sort of basic guidelines that development that's going to occur within. So if you were able to say you can only have, this is where the curb cuts are, things like that, it starts to affect where buildings go, so.
Aren't the curb cuts part of zoning, or are they not?
Well, yeah, when we start to build out infrastructure, there will be some practical aspects of it in terms of some choices we'll have to make regardless of zoning about curb cuts. I mean, we're not in zoning defining the curb cut can exist here or exist there.
Right.
So that would be more within the infrastructure.
And a more nuts and bolts question, if I may. Where exactly are you or is the proposal for new traffic lights? Is there one at the top of Charter Road? At the end, or at the bottom of Charter Road?
So Community Way, the road that goes through the Roach Brothers, Eden's lot, there's one at the top proposed, at the top of that at 27. There's not one proposed at the bottom.
And nothing at Charter Road?
This project doesn't, Charter Road's not within the scope of this project.
I'm sorry, I must have the name of the road wrong. It certainly looks like Charter Road is on this map. The turn into...
sorry, yeah, no, my bad. I'm thinking something else from the other side. No, there's not a light turning into the school. There will be turning lanes, and I think, nominally, there would be a bus stop there. But there's not a proposed light there.
Okay.
So,
and again, I've got another last question. I'll try and stop. Sure. I see from the small picture, how many cars are expected to be able to be queued up to make the left turn off of 111 onto 27?
I'd have to go find the data on that. I don't know exactly what it is.
Because from this picture, it doesn't look like enough.
Yeah, I mean...
No, it looks really scary here. If you remember how many cars queue up to make that left turn now, and if you cut that down, it's not enough.
Yeah, I mean...
Looks like you got four cars backed up. Right. Really, it's more like 15.
Right. I mean, the rendering shows the idea is that rendering literal in terms of how far back. I'd refer back probably to the plan more than the rendering. But again, I don't know the exact count.
Okay. But
the traffic engineer has, laid this out with some sense of how many cars you can get without, you can't have it go completely too far back. And so there are all these considerations going into it. And I don't know, again, the exact number.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
So Doug?
I just would distill some of the comments I made a moment ago into some recommendations. First of all, I would urge that you continue the contact with Stop and Shop Real Estate, and that you expand it by bringing into the conversation Verizon and Baker Oil, because those three properties together are very interesting. Regrettably, the 110 restaurant deal seems to have been done, and that's smack in the middle of that great big juicy parcel. The other parcel that I would urge that you pursue is Bueno Isano, the Bank of America, and the bowling alley. Those two parcels across the street from each other would wipe out almost all the concerns that the community has about Kelly's Corner, and that's the end of it. I don't think that the next parcel down where Sorrento's in and so on, the family that owns that has recently put hundreds of thousands of dollars into improvements into it, and just simply jacking up the price of acquisition for whoever is going to take it out. Now, in the background of all this, if we're talking about $9 to $12 million, we have the Walker property, which was probably the most expensive acquisition the town has ever done, for $500,000 an acre, as I recall, something like that. And there are people actually talking about turning it into a senior center instead of flipping it as soon as possible into a highly desirable commercial real estate development that would be suitable to the site and the town and so on, a decision that would only happen if we approve it and if we like the deal and we like the developer, and then we'd sell it to them. And so if you take that standard and you say, okay, we'll use that for land costs, then you take your $12 million and say at $500,000 an acre, you can buy 24 acres.
But that's
which would be all of Kmart, all of Verizon, Baker, the Bueno Misano site, and the bowling alley.
But the funding sources are different. We don't have $12 million to buy land.
We haven't been trying. We haven't really been looking to aggregate the parcels. And that's, now we're talking about having to go sky high with residential, questionable demographics, in order to leverage the development on sites which are now performing. I just would urge that first of all, we get married to all the property owners, and then secondly, that we begin serious conversations with developers and seek ways in which we can cooperate to get the aggregations to occur naturally. But saying that, well, this isn't going to happen for 25 years means that you could buy that land for not much money at all and do whatever you want to do with it. And so could a developer working in cooperation with us. And I think Win Stanley would be a great choice.
Well, Win Stanley's talking with Stop and Shop. The committee as a whole hasn't had conversations with Verizon. We've had contact with them through the planning department. Win Stanley, I presume, I don't know, but I presume they've talked to Verizon. I presume they've talked to Baker. And that's all part of their calculation about whether or not they can move forward on the site. Yeah, the 110 grill, it is what it is until, we see what happens there. As planning body, so to speak, we're entirely independent of that sort of approval process. I agree with this in the sense of, yes, it'd be great to go talk to individual developers. In fact, we have, in a sense, reached out to Chris Starr, for example, in Bueno Misano, and we've reached out to every single property owner in several different ways. But are we the body? I don't think we are sort of mandating, and our sort of expertise is that sort of body for the town to go out and try and literally sort of not negotiate, but try and sort of develop pacts with them. There has to be a broader, I think, aspect than just sort of coming from the Kelly's Corner Committee.
Well, and I would just say that, to that point, I think the committee wanted to be careful, as much as we were doing outreach to developers and property owners, we want to be careful about, before this zoning is improved, we don't want to be making deals with developers. Does that make sense? We want to make sure that this is realistic and something that they're interested in, and that's partly what the pro formas were done, to sort of do that on a mega basis, but also when you just to see, is it really real with a real developer sort of thing, which is what we've done. But we didn't want to be in a situation where we were sort of making deals with different developers before the zoning's even passed. And so I think that's kind of the place that it's at now. But I think, hopefully with this new economic developer or economic development officer in town, and maybe you, Doug, so you have a lot of expertise in this, we can really start getting to those deals. And, that's what we hope will happen very soon if the zoning is passed.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
So, yeah, one other, the public forum on Acton, Kelly's Corner is February 4th.
Yep. Thursday, February 4th, 7 o'clock, right, Andy? Is it 7? Here.
7 o'clock here. Thursday, February 4th is the public forum.
Now, on last Thursday, the ALG committee met where they presented their budget. Unfortunately, I did send you the summary sheet. I don't have it in front of me, but basically the things that jumped out of that budget was the 2.67 million in use of reserves, the amount of unlevied tax. Right. And then they even showed a bit of excess,
It's like 500K.
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 Yeah, which I think is kind of, I don't know about the, how valid that number is. If it is just a bookkeeping fiction or it is real.
I'd be happy to make a comment on that.
Yes, please do.
Surplus that comes about by using 2.7 million in reserves, which is one-time money, and 985,000 in unused levy capacity, which is one-time money, is not a surplus. It's actually a deficit of, let's see, 3.2 million. I mean, I hate to think he spent a lot of time discussing that number.
Well, I think what we did discuss, well, first of all, we did discuss a lot about the FinCom's point of view about, not using reserves so heavily. We spent a lot of time on that. But then the other thing that we talked about and wanted to specifically bring back to this committee now, because I think the numbers are going to change around some, right? We know that happens. But, where would we want to take if we indeed have this extra 500,000? And I'm hoping that goes up because I'm hoping that, the schools and the municipality can, can tighten their belts a little more than what's there now. But whatever we have, where does that come from? Does it come, do we want to use less of the unused tax levy? Do we want to use less of the reserves in the budget? And so that's the discussion I think that Mike and I wanted to have with you guys tonight, sort of philosophically, where do we want that to come from? What do we want to have reduced? Do we want to have the taxes reduced? Do we want to have the reserve use reduced?
We're putting the cart before the horse. Our point of view said not to use any reserves. There's 2.7 million in reserve use in that number. I don't know that we said anything about the unused levy capacity this year, but we certainly said last year that we didn't want to see that used either. So there's no surplus in my mind. We're still staring at a deficit, quite a large deficit. Now, as far as I'm concerned, you may have discussed the point of view. Did we ever actually get any formal feedback from either body?
Yes, we did, which I think we reported back.
Did they say they were ignoring it, or?
I think the sense was, there's a lot of pushback on the reserve use because people don't believe that we'll run out of reserves. And, we actually did ask Steve Barrett to get us a very clear picture because the current sort of chart, the table of the reserves is not updated, that we were working off of ALG. And so he said he knew he couldn't have that ready for this meeting, but he's going to have it ready for the 26th, our next meeting, so we can really see exactly the trend of reserves. So, so there's, I think, a sense of disbelief that the reserves will actually go down that far, because sometimes they get replenished. And, I made the point that a lot of what's happened in the last few years since I've been a member of the FinCom was we've had these sort of one-time windfalls. But there's also a point made, which is what I want to be able to investigate further, but I think there's truth to it, is that, every year we spit off some, at least the town does. We spit off some money that then replenishes the reserves to some degree because the budgeting process is very conservative. So anyway, so that discussion has been had, and that was the feedback, is people sort of don't really believe that the reserves are going down because they were told for years they were going down, and then they went up because of these one-time windfalls. So that was one piece of the feedback. The second piece was to not use any reserves at all in the budget was simply unrealistic, and specifically, the schools didn't feel like they could do that. There was not, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Christina, but they just felt like that was not realistic, but rather, and we sort of said, okay, well, can we at least sort of move towards a system where we're budgeting, we're trying to budget without having this heavy use on heavy reliance on reserves. So that was the other part of the feedback. I'm trying to think if there was something else. I feel like we had this discussion at our last meeting, but maybe we didn't.
Well, I know one other issue was that even with this reserve use and the unused tax levy, tax rate is projected to go up 5.6%, which I think
That's
is...
the unused levy capacity. That's what you're doing, is you're basically having a mini override.
Because you have the unused. So
Yeah.
anyway, so I come back to this point about, I think it would be useful for us to discuss, where we think, I understand your point, Steve, we don't have a surplus. Yes, we don't have a surplus, but the way that the ALG model was built was they were using this amount of reserves and they were using this much tax levy, and then, wow, it turned out we had 500,000 in there. So they're saying, do we want to have 385,000 used of unused tax levy instead, if we just took it straight?
I want to go back to the beginning here.
So, that's what they're
The fact that
saying.
they put numbers in a model doesn't matter. No ALG can bind the next ALG. So the fact that there was 2.7 million put in for FY17 last year has no bearing on anything. You guys have to start from scratch and say, how much reserves do we need to use? There was no vote, no decision made by the last ALG to use that amount of money in FY17. We have to go back to FY15 when we were relatively in balance. And then we have to, before I'm going to say we should use reserves, I want to see somebody take me from FY15 actuals to FY17 budgets and tell me what changed. What's different? And if there's one-time items that were favorable in FY15, fine, we'll add them in. If we hired some people that for the FY17 budget, like the new land use director, fine, we'll factor that in. But I want somebody to take this relatively recent experience we've had of being in balance. I want them to reconcile those FY15 actuals to the FY17 budget and tell me where it all went. Because, the most recent experience we have of actual numbers was in balance, not in deficit.
Well, I think that's partly what is the one argument that's being made is the actual numbers, is that some of the money that we budget for reserves, we don't actually end up using, so it ends up.
So we don't have to budget them.
So that might be true.
You made my case, thank you.
That might be true. So that's why I want to actually get that detailed chart of the reserves, so we can actually see what's been going on with the reserves. But I still think we need to understand, so one other point, I believe that the ALG model that was presented to us last week was what had the most current, first cracks at the town budget and the school budget. So I don't think it's sort of out of thin air. But I think we still need to deliberate as a body. Would we rather see the tax levy go down, or would we rather see less of a use of reserves? Fundamentally, I think we have to deliberate about that.
Let's define our terms. Tax levy is going to go up by, what did it say? The single-family tax bill is going up by 5% under this plan. Do we want to have a tax increase? Not do we want to see the tax levy go down? Recently, we've been doing 2.5%, sometimes less. So the question is, do we want to see the town double the increase in taxes this year?
It's like $600 a family.
Well, so my personal preference would to see the tax levy reduced, rather than reduce the use in reserves. But we have on our point of view that we have this hard and fast thing that we don't want any use of reserves. So anyway, that's what I think the discussion
I
is.
thought in our point of view, we said we wanted to draw the reserves down to 5%.
That's our ultimate goal, but there is also a sense of we just shouldn't be relying sort of, in the way that we do our budgets, the goal is to sort of not rely on reserves to balance the numbers.
I mean, let's back up for a second. The school district got a, whatever you want to call it, a warning from Moody's for using reserves. The state just got, we got a warning or a downgrade for the same, I think I got a downgrade, I don't know whether it was Moody's or S&P, or both, for the same basic reason,
Moody's.
Relying too heavily.
Who did?
The state of Massachusetts. We spent a lot of time on Saturday talking about capital. The schools shortly will be talking a lot of time, a lot of money on capital. There's some clear signals coming from bond rating agencies that you shouldn't use so much reserves. So the bond rating agencies don't look at our ALG plan. They look at our actual financial statements. And then they look at your plan. So at the moment, the last actual set of financial statements they're going to see for both parties are going to look pretty well in balance. And then we're going to tell them our plan is to go into the hole by $3-4 million a year going forward. It's not going to look too attractive. So I think we need to get this question wrestled to the ground this year. If you don't need the reserves, if you're not planning on using the reserves, then don't budget them, because it has an adverse impact on our financing. If you are going to use them, then we have another problem to discuss. How long can we keep using them?
Doug?
Microphone.
Add some embroidery to that. We have some unfinished business. We bought a piece of land for $2 million, primarily to control our destiny and get it out of the hands of somebody that was hostile to our community. And now there's talk about absorbing it. It was paid for out of reserves and took a 20% chunk out of the reserves. It's a highly visible, highly prominent, eminently developable piece of land, and I'm certainly hopeful that the Board of Selectmen has instructed staff to be working earnestly with potential developers of that site so that we can sell it and get our money back. The other thing is that this cannot be looked at from the perspective of 2015, 16, 17. It has to be looked at in the longer term. We've just received the capital report on the town, and we're shortly to receive the capital analysis, meaning capital needs of our asset base for both the town and the schools going forward. And the window is likely to be 10 to 20 years on that. I haven't seen the document. So at that point, I'm confident that we're going to be looking at $75 to $100 million worth of capital improvements that will be required for both the town and the schools. It's likely that in the mix is going to be a $9 million police station, fire station, an $8 to $9 million senior center, and somewhere in the order of $9 to $12 million worth of curb cuts and street widening and tweaking of traffic flow in Kelly's Corner.
They will not be paid for the town.
Which hopefully we won't have to pay for, but we're going to put up hundreds of thousands of dollars to leverage that eventuality, something like $750,000. So, you look ahead and you look at what's coming down the road at us, and it's pretty impressive. So I think that any analysis now of what we're going to do to posture ourselves as far as our taxes are concerned, and what we're going to do with respect to our reserves has to be looked at from the long-term perspective. And that simply looking at it on a 2 or 3 year window is going to get us in a lot of trouble.
And I think to Steve's point,
Jason?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think to Steve's point, we need to look at the total amount of money that the towns and the schools wish to spend rather than worrying about rather than discussing whether we're going to raise taxes or whether we're going to maximize the use of reserves or whether we're going to dip into the semi-super secret rainy day fund of untaxed levy. So I think what Steve, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Steve, but I think what you're trying to say is if the expenses are going up by 5.6%, we need to know why.
Well, I think the why is what we went to budget Saturday for, and the why will be when we go to the school budget Saturday for. But I guess I'm still not getting any clarity from anyone about if there's a preference on reducing the tax levy or
At the risk
reducing the use of
becoming
reserves?
highly unpopular, my preference is that we pay our debts as soon as possible. And we do not necessarily, and knowing that we've got a $75 to $100 million capital problem coming down the road, let's not jeopardize our bond rating by dipping into the amount that we have currently on reserve.
So you would say that should come from the reserves and not the tax?
No, I would say we should tax it, which makes me instantly...
Wait, I'm sorry, what?
He would say
What I'm
tax
saying
it.
is you would say that we protect our reserves and
Correct.
tax.
Correct.
Right.
Realize that just made most of the town mad at me, but we're seeing that we've got a major bill coming. The last thing I want to do is say we've got reserves now, and we can use them now when we're really going to need them
Well,
soon.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a couple comments.
Doug?
I think that one of the things to keep in mind is that we have too much in the way of reserves at this point. By any guideline, we probably have more reserves than any community in the state in terms of, as a percentage of our total annual budget. And if we're not number one, we're certainly in the top 3 or 4. And so the question on the table, a question that should be on the table is, do we have too much in reserve? And what is the appropriate amount?
Isn't that why we agreed to go down to 5%
We
and
did
lock it
discuss
there?
earnestly going down to 5% because that was where the state guideline was. Now, the point about bond ratings that needs to get made is that if we're going to do a lot of borrowing, and we haven't done much borrowing at all in the last few years, and so the fact that we had a wonderful bond rating was nice, and we could certainly, pat ourselves on the back about it, but it didn't have much practical impact. With interest rates as low as they were, and the fact that we weren't doing much borrowing, the advantage of having a wonderful bond rating didn't add up to a lot of cash. But going forward, if the Fed continues to raise interest rates over the next X number of years, and we have come into our own in terms of the capital program that has been sort of sketched out for the town and shortly will be for the schools, then we're likely to do a bunch of borrowing in a higher interest environment than has been the case over the last few years. So the bond rating is going to become more meaningful as the years go forward than it has been over the last several years. So again, I'm plumping for a longer-term view, and I think the bond rating is a factor which will become increasingly important as time goes on.
I feel like you're agreeing with me.
David?
Where do you come down?
Yeah, just 2 comments. Number one, about the rating being more important. I would actually argue the opposite, that as rates go up, the spread difference between AAA and like a AA bond becomes less a question of the total percentage rate than the actual rates moving up in aggregate.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Number 2 is, just take your comment full circle, Doug, is if I look at the projections for fiscal 18, there's a $3.4 billion use of reserves, and then it drops in at least this ALG model to $1.3 billion in fiscal 19.
Did you say billion?
I'm sorry, million, sorry. For the record, I meant million. And I would just add, to follow on Doug's comments just about the longer-term nature of this, is that if we do have very significant capital needs in the context of short-term planning versus long-term, just something to keep in mind is that these numbers would probably come down just keeping the tax rate on, even if it's growing at the max in any case, these numbers are going to come down in the context of whatever the capital needs are going forward, just because they are so great. So having a 10% of reserves or 8% of reserves or whatever, it might be a nice shock absorber just in the near term, given that we are going to know, we do know we have some bigger expenses coming down, but anyways.
One of the difficulties about
You had a
having
comment?
substantial reserves is that it's a target. It's a temptation to spend the money. If you're right down on the 5% level, then if somebody wants to be real adventurous with an acquisition or something of the sort, then they have to come back and either get the town to raise the money for it or to agree to dip into the reserves, which are cruising at that point at the 5% level. As long as the reserves are at a number more resembling 10-12%, then they look real fungible. And I think that they're vulnerable because it's a temptation for folk in town, whether elected or not, to pursue projects and ideas and so on that are potentially quite expensive and are all occurring in a near time frame.
Kristen?
Thank you, Mike. I just have a few comments on different comments that are made, hopefully just to provide some clarification from the school's perspective. Steve, you asked if we ever gave feedback on the point of view. We were never asked for feedback on the point of view.
Usually the last line says.
Oh, does it say it? We certainly were kept apprised of it along the way, and you shared it at the 3-board meeting that we had, and I don't think there were any surprises in there to us. So I think by not giving you feedback, it was sort of the assumption that we understand your point of view. There was a comment about the schools can't budget without the use of reserves. I think the issue really was there was a discussion about budgets going up 3%, and someone did say, well, the school budget right now couldn't be what we're planning if we were only going up 3%. That was sort of the discussion at ALG. My main perception from Thursday's ALG meeting, though, is that it really was just a starting point. The schools haven't had their budget Saturday yet. The town hadn't yet at that point either. So it really was a starting point, and we were all sent back with our marching orders that Margaret has shared with you. So I think we didn't go into any details on the budget and any details about new programs or potential cuts or anything, because we haven't gone through that in detail at our budget Saturdays. So again, I think it was a starting point, and it doesn't, and I think that was sort of the understanding of the group. From the school's perspective, our E&D is already much improved. We were able to really add a lot back to it at the close of FY15, and it's up, not certified, but I think around 1.8 million now. So we're in much better shape than we had thought and that we were when Moody's did give us that warning. And lastly, Jason, you mentioned expenses going up 5.6%, but I think that is actually, that's not the school's expenses going up 5.6, and I don't think it's the town, it's the tax at the moment, the way the tax.
Very well. A tax rate going up of 5.6% is reflective of expenditures going up at a similar rate. Is that not true?
Yeah, our tax bill goes up 5.6% over the prior year, which represents about $600 per family.
Okay, but that
based on the current model.
Right, and I understand that, but that doesn't mean that either of the separate budgets are going up 5.6%.
I never implied it did. I said that our expenses are going to go up by 5.6%. If the tax rate is going up by that, that means the amount of money we, as combined entities, are spending. Is that not the truth?
The school's gross budget will not go up 5.6%. One never knows with the assessment. It could well go up 5%, but don't say no.
I thought you were going to say 5.6.
So, but what's driving the tax bill has nothing to do with anything except the unused levy capacity, which is close to $1 million. So if 2.5% yields you, I don't know, 1.7 million in new revenue, and you throw another $1 million reclaimed from prior years, that drives the single-family tax bill up, obviously more than 2.5%.
Right, but at the end of the day,
it was more like 4.
At the end of the day, the amount of money that is procured, whether it be through taxation or through use of reserves or whatnot, that the whole purpose of that final number is to meet the budgeted expenses of everything involved. So if this year the tax burden to the homeowner goes up by 5.6%, there is a correlation with the amount of money that is being spent. Is that not true?
Could I just step in with the numbers from the ALG budget, which will help clarify this?
Can you speak up a little?
Sure. So from the spreadsheet for the ALG plan, the municipal funding sources, including the tax levy, which goes up by 5.8% to $77.6 million, And then total funding sources for Acton going up $4.4 million, it's up 5.1%. That compares to the allocation of budgets, municipal spending, which is up 2.8%, school assessment up 5.17%, and then Minuteman assessment up 24%, total Acton spending up 4.5%. So all these net together to be in the ballpark.
5.6%, that's my point. Okay, thank you.
Brian, you had a comment?
Yeah, the only comment I want to make, and Jason, this goes to kind of your question about the single-family tax bills. If it's going up 5.6, then that directly correlates to the budget or the expenses going up to 5.6. That's true to an extent. However, there's another component of that, which is the CIP class, the commercial, industrial, and personal property, which is not factored in here. When I looked at this, and again, I got to go through this model with Steve Barrett, and I know, Margaret, you had touched on, we need to work in the reserve page and some others here for our next meeting, but that's one of the pages I need to look at is, what really is happening, as an estimate in FY17. Do I take up the single-family tax bill at a higher rate valuation-wise than I do commercial, industrial, and personal property? It's very dynamic, the real estate market, so I really need to look at those sectors. Are those sectors increasing at the same level of increases, or is the residential sector increasing at a higher rate than the CIP class, the commercial, industrial, and personal property? Because if that is the case, then it's going to absorb a larger piece of that increase in the expenditure. So there's a lot of moving parts.
Well, now that we filled that space behind the post office, we're all set, right?
There we go. Oh, wait a minute.
Can I?
Margaret?
Thanks, Mike. So again, I guess, I know what the POV says, but I guess my personal opinion, if we have this sort of hypothetical, we'll call it hypothetical 500,000, because we don't know what things are going to actually net out to be, that I would say we take that to reduce what we're using, our reliance on the unused levy capacity, so that our actual tax bill does not go up 5.68%, but goes up less than that. And the reason I would recommend that is for two reasons. One is the unused levy capacity is, in a sense, a reserve, because it means that we can tap into that. It's not actual money, but we can tap into that ability to tax if we need to in the future without having to go to an override. But it's not money sitting around that's sort of, to quote Doug, sort of tempting to all these people. It's sort of, 'cause it's not actually in the bank. Right. But it's still sort of a source of reserves in its own way. Secondly, to Doug's point about not wanting to have these massive amounts of reserves, actual reserves, dollar reserves, that I would rather have, that reserve piece used first than have that unused tax levy used first. So I know this contradicts what I was saying in ALG, because I was trying to present the Finance Committee's opinion, but that's my, and I think that philosophy only works to a certain extent, because again, I don't want to go past the 5% in the reserves, in utilizing reserves and the yada yada, but I feel like, it's an opportunity to sort of not tax the Acton taxpayers as much, and yet we still kind of have a sense of a reserve, because we still have that portion of unused tax or unused tax levy capacity that we can tap into down the road if need be, with all the capital commitments that we might be taking on. So
let me try and put it another way. Okay. So what you're recommending, Margaret, is our FY16 reserve use was, I believe, $2.3 million. You're advocating that we increase our reliance on one-time money in FY17 by roughly $600,000.
So what I'm advocating is, if I have to pick from the two,
no, I'm just saying,
then I would say that yes.
The way the math works is you want to use more reserves than we did last year.
Yes. And the reason, no, it's not because I want to use more. I'm just saying, if I have to pick between what I want to use it from, I would want to use it from the reserves first and not from taxing. Because
that's not the position the committee took.
I understand, and I'm saying that's my personal opinion, and I also think that, you know, one of the reasons why I want to take a look at that reserve sheet is to see what the actuals are. Because to your point earlier, Steve, you know, it seems like we're spitting off a lot of money every year. So what is it? How much is it? What has been our actual reserve use? Because if our actual reserve use is not that much, to your point earlier, Steve, then maybe we're...
Table was in the point of view.
Then maybe we're not, yeah, but I want to see a longer, further back than that. So anyway...
Go back more than 10 years, we didn't have any reserves.
Well, anyway, so that's my point. So, but if we want to, you know, go straight with exactly what the point of view said, then I think our point of view would tell us that we would only want to cut down on our use of reserves, period.
Like I said, until I see something that shows me how we got from a balanced budget in FY15 to such a large deficit in FY17, I would not be willing to change the point of view.
Bob?
My principal comment is, where's Bill Mullen when we need him? As you will recall, the committee when he was a member of it, worked very hard to not every year raise taxes by 2.5%. Not to create a reserve or a piggy bank, but just not to use it. And it seems to me that we should not go above 2.5% in terms of raising the levy limit, which means either using the reserves or not spending the money, which would probably be the wiser point of view. Following Margaret's leadership last year of explaining ourselves to the outside world, I did go to the senior center last week and chatted with a small but interested group of people. One gentleman said, "Do you mean that we can have a 2.5% increase every year for the next 10 years?" And unfortunately, I had to tell him that sounded just exactly what he was going to see. But remember, the seniors, somebody's going to come to town meeting and ask for money, probably more than is necessary for preliminary plans for a senior center. Isn't that nice for seniors? Many of those seniors who are ardent users of the senior center rely extensively on Social Security for their income. Social Security did not go up this year.
0% increase.
And yet you're going to turn around and say to these people, well, you should raise your taxes by 5.6%. I do not think this is a wise idea. So my position when you go back to the ALG is keep your hands off the unused tax levy.
Yes, for the entertainment of our studio audience and TV audience, I just would like to summarize some of the points that we were making in our point of view in case, just to clarify what we're talking about. These are just summary points that we believe an override in the near future should be avoided. And if we're trying to follow some key recommendations, the main point being to return to structurally balanced operations by limit tax increases to 2.5%. It's sort of a limit, doesn't mean we have to go that high. Limit spending increases to 3%, and no planned use of reserves. We replenish the stabilization fund as part of maintaining an overall reserve balance of 5% of budgeted spending. So no Proposition 2.5 override. We continue to fund OPEB contributions. And then the final piece is forming capital planning committee, which we will be talking about later. And at the bottom of our summary of the point of view, we did ask, the last question says, Finance Committee would love to hear your feedback about this point of view. And email questions to fincom@actonmass.gov. So that's that.
Does anyone else
Margaret.
want to chime in? So right now I have Bob would prefer to see the tax levy lowered. Jason would prefer to not see that, right? You'd rather see the reserves
Well, I agree with Steve. I'd like to know where the added expense has come in the last 2 years. But being that we have a budget that we have to meet, I understand we're going to use some reserves. That's what was discussed. I do not want to see us put the 5% reserve in jeopardy in any way, shape, or form. And I think that we need to, for anybody who is saying that we're going to be able to dip into this big piggy bank of reserves, I would immediately caution them that we have capital needs coming down the road at a very fast clip.
So, sorry, can I? So first, I would second what Steve said. So I like to figure out what the increase. So that's number one. Number two, in terms of priorities. Number two is that if we have to spend the money, I would say we draw down the reserved up to 5%. And so that's my second. The third thing is if I have to do it further, I will raise the tax. The last thing is that to use the tax levy. I think that's the last thing we should do. And so that's my priority if I have to vote right now.
Sounds a lot like what I just said, and I agree.
No, but you said the opposite before, I thought.
You said drawing down reserves to zero. I never said that. I said drawing reserves down to the 5% as discussed in the point of view.
Okay, okay, that's fine. I'm just trying to get a sense of it. I'm not accusing anyone of saying anything. So you're saying
we're allowed to raise taxes at 2.5% without jeopardy of an override. I'm nowhere near suggesting an override. Don't even want to breathe the word. But 2.5%, I would much rather see us tax the 2.5% full than dip into reserves, knowing that we've got a use for the reserves in the near future.
And so would you rather also have us use the tax levy before we dip into reserves? The unused tax levy? Because that's what I'm trying to get a sense of. And you're saying...
Do not violate the 5% floor of the reserves.
How much do you think we have in reserves?
My understanding is we have between $10 and $11 million in reserve. 7 to 8?
Well, I'm happy to table this discussion to some degree until we get a clearer read on reserves, but it sounds like, there are difference of opinion, and it might be that once we get to that sort of 5%, almost circuit breaker, you could call it, if you wanted to, then there might be different opinions of how much, would we rather use tax levy capacity, would we rather use the reserves to fund budget?
Fair enough.
The difference on the 8 and 10 is the acquisition of the Walker property, which we said we would backfill from other sources.
That's right.
So the reserves were to be restored, which made a lot of sense. If you say we're going to sell the land and recoup our investment, we're going to sell it into the hands of a developer whose project we like and whose the cut of whose jib we like and all that sort of thing, and then we'll stand back and let them go ahead and do something desirable.
But you know me, Doug, I don't count that money until we actually have it.
I beg your pardon?
You know me, Doug, I don't count that money until we actually have it. And we haven't sold that property yet.
No, and I don't think any effort's being made to sell it. I doubt very much any effort's being made to sell it at this stage of the game. But that was what was brooded about, is that we would backfill the reserves from some other source afterwards. So, the notion was we weren't drawing down the reserves permanently. Well, if you're not going to sell the land, then you got to eat $2 million someplace, right? So I think that I agree with the summary that's just been made. I think that the reserves are too high. It's true that there are projects coming, and you can say we're going to need them. But at the same time, the presence of the reserves is an inducement to spend money that might not necessarily get spent, or commitments made if the money wasn't just sitting there cooling its heels. So there's a double-edged sword there. If you've got the money, people are going to try and spend it. If you don't have the money, you have the chance of seeing some discipline in the spending authorities.
All right, so Mike, should we table this and talk about it in more detail once we have this sort of detail?
Yeah, I think some of these numbers have to get firmed up a bit more before we can make rational conclusions. But I think we are in consensus when we're saying we're not comfortable with the ALG plan as it's laid out today.
in terms of how much the taxes are going up.
Yes, in terms of the unused tax levy, the use of reserves, the tax rate increase,
Right, all of those things combined.
all the above.
Okay, great. So I would just say, everyone sort of ponder over this in the next 2 weeks and think about it, and I think there might be, I think for a lot of us, it sounds like, we're maybe comfortable drawing down reserves until we get to the 5%, and maybe we want to draw down until we get to the 5%, so we don't have this sort of bundle of money out there as a source to fund any boondoggle project. So anyway, we'll come back to this, and in the meantime, I guess we'll report back to ALG what Mike just said, and that we're still kind of discussing the other piece of it, so.
Mr. Chairman, one more comment.
Moving right along, Dave.
Just looking at this new ALG plan, and this is a horrible idea, I'm sure, but would it be worth, there's projections in here for fiscal 18 that are mostly filled out, and you could easily make some assumptions about, state aid being flat, or school funding sources, and these transportation and so on, these different accounts being flattish. But in this fiscal 18 projection, the actual growth of Acton spending is up 5.1%, and that's over the 4.5% for fiscal 17. So my horrible idea is it worth looking at these budgets in the context of multiple out years, given these projections are squishy, and we all understand that, and things tend to move around. But if you make a few assumptions here, it'd be pretty easy to come upon the tax bill for fiscal 18 as well as 19. And, again, perhaps looking at those numbers in the out years would give people some sense of, okay, we're possibly talking about, high taxes next year, but it could be the following years after that. Again, horrible idea, understood.
Mr. Chairman, one factor that needs to be kept in mind is that 70% of our budget is people. It is virtually impossible to win a arbitration on a labor dispute when the union is able to say, but Your Honor, they have $12 million in reserves sitting there. They have more money than any other community in the Commonwealth, perhaps. They can't possibly mean that they can't pay us what we're asking for. Words to that effect. You can see that sort of a conversation occurring. So in the presence of a large reserve number, it is a constraint on our ability to negotiate fiercely labor contracts where we really need to be disciplined about increasing our costs on the personnel side. Since 70% of the budget is people, that factor in terms of why it's desirable or not desirable to have a high reserve number needs to be kept in the foreground.
Steve.
No, Dave, it's an excellent idea. One that's been discussed at ALG for many, many years. There's two things I will tell you about ALG model, and all you relatively new guys pay attention. There's two things that you'll never see on it. One is an actual number for any year. You'll only look budget to budget to budget to budget to budget. And two, you'll never see either of the out years, meaning the 2 years beyond the current year that we're budgeting, get any more attention than about a half hour at the last ALG meeting before the warrant goes to press.
True.
Could we possibly, Brian, could we start putting those in the model, those actuals? Because that really bothers me, too.
No, I think, Margaret, what we've done in the past is we've done a snapshot of, we've done the budget for FY15, and then we've actually did the snapshot of the close in FY15 as well for comparisons, whether that's currently in this model or not. I know the tax recap is, now whether the expenditures are all in here or not, I don't know. I can talk to Steve Barrett about that, but I know we have done that in the past.
Okay, we really have to move on to the next agenda item, the school board committee proposal. We had that was Kristen's proposal. I know part of that was about capital planning appointments. I don't know if those two are related.
The other one was about, Sorry, the other school board committee proposal that I think Kristen wanted us to discuss was just doing the quarterly reports.
Right.
Right? And if we wanted to think of a forum for us to go over there, combined with Boxborough or something like that versus you guys come. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
I'm glad I stayed. I wasn't exactly sure what the proposal was that was on the budget, on the agenda. So, yes, when we had our three-board meeting with Boxborough, they expressed interest in having us come to their finance committee members to present our quarterly reports. And once we started thinking about all of the extra nights that would be to do Acton and Boxborough separately, to present information that frankly is already presented at a public meeting to the school committee, it seemed to make sense to try to invite the FinComs to our meetings to hear that information or to watch it online. So I did mention that at an ALG, hoping that if we give you some lead time and an invitation for when those quarterly reports will be presented, that you could attend our school committee meetings or watch the taped version of them, as opposed to having us come to your meetings to present. And so what we did for our February 4th, which is when our next quarterly report is being presented, is we did invite your committee and Boxborough, but I know you have a conflict now with the Kelly's Corner Forum. So we will be coming to discuss our budget a couple of weeks later, and we can do the quarterly report at the same time. But I just wonder in general if the having you come to us as opposed to us coming to you would be a workable option.
I think with enough advance notice, we could probably make those arrangements. It seems fair and reasonable. This time it was, it is clearly a conflict with the public forum for Kelly's Corner, Acton 2020, so it just wasn't possible. But I think it's fair and reasonable to work something out like that.
February 4th is when our next quarterly report will be. I know Steve is always at our meetings anyway, and can report back to you, and they are always taped as well. Margaret did express some concern about, is there a way to sort of have a place at the table and be more involved in those discussions at our meetings? But like any public meeting, there's a mic and a place and time to ask questions as well. So I would encourage you, if you're there and have questions, to certainly be involved and to ask them.
Yeah, I just wondered if there was any way to kind of prioritize FinCom members during just that portion of the meeting, both Acton and Boxborough ones. And I don't know if you guys do that otherwise, but that was my only thought. Not necessarily that we'd be around a table or anything like that, that we can't even logistically work that, but just that there might be a priority there, just given the history of these.
There could be the presentation and then comments from the finance committees afterwards, sort of built into the agenda. That's off the top of my head.
Yeah, I think that would work, maybe putting it in the agenda like that, so there's at least, a designated time for that or something like that. I think that could be helpful. Otherwise, I have no problem.
What time is the meeting on the 4th, and if that's at the RJ Gray?
It's at RJ Gray. It's at 7 o'clock. And we're having our final report from Doran Whittier on our existing condition study present that night as well. And so that's another reason we had wanted to invite you.
In the library?
It's in the library at the junior high.
And your accountants are giving their report on the year end, right?
The year...
Is that?
Oh,
no, that's this one.
That's this, one. Yes. We're having our auditor report on Thursday.
On the quarterly reports, I think it would probably be sufficient if Claire gets them done a day ahead of your meeting, which I know she usually does, is to just send them to both, probably Acton and the Finance Committee in Boxborough, and people can decide to come if they want, or send questions, that whoever represents the Finance Committee can ask when they're there.
They'll always be posted the Friday before our meeting as part of our packet, but we could also certainly send them separately. Any other questions? Well, thank you. I know that the staff will thank you, saved them 8 evenings out.
Thank you. Now, we want to finalize that the school committee is also requesting 2 members of the finance committee to serve on their capital planning group for the regional school committee. And we had volunteered Doug and Jason, but it was preliminary. We want to make them.
You just weren't here, so we didn't want to make an appointment without you here, but yeah.
I think we did have some questions about what the charge of the committee was.
Right.
And I don't know if that's been clarified, because what we were looking at that evening didn't say anything about finance committees or board of selectmen or anything else, just said a couple of people.
Some warm bodies.
Yeah.
The charge of the committee, as listed in the memo from Dr. Brand, is to review space usage alongside enrollment projections in the district's 8 schools and preschool facility, to review the results of the district-wide commission studies, meaning the existing condition study, and the phase 2, which is the educational visioning study, and reports that pertain to the district's buildings, grounds, or campuses, and to assist in the annual review and development of the district's capital plan. So the idea of having 2 members from the Finance Committee specifically sort of evolved over time. We had thought we would have representation from the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee from each town, and Boxborough chose to just have Finance Committee representatives, and I think with our Board of Selectmen being small and with the town's capital planning committee not being fully formed yet, it seemed like there was more appetite from the Finance Committee to serve on this group. Or will be, right? So I thank you both for volunteering. I think it will be great to have you become really steeped in the information that's to come.
So we would consider these appointments finalized. Mr. Rowland.
Do we need to vote on that?
Well, do you have a vote?
I vote that I propose that we... Make a motion. Make a motion that we appoint Doug and Jason to the ABRSC Capital Planning Committee.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Say aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Congratulations, team.
The new appointee now that he intends to dragoon the chairman of our long-term financial plan subcommittee to join the
Keeping an eye on the clock. Next item of business, we had listed the town meeting timeline discussion. One of the ongoing issues we have with town meetings of any type is that the timing of the warrant articles, having enough time to, well, one is having the time to review them, and the warrant themselves that have enough, are worded adequately and have enough financial detail that we can make, correct decisions based on the financial impact of those warrants on the town of Acton. And as we keep harping on the last special town meeting, we really had issues, and we got called on the carpet by, rightfully so, by some of the members of the community for really lack of not keeping an eye on the ball. And so I think somehow we would like to propose a process that we get, that we ensure that if we are being asked to vote on these warrant articles, that one, we get them in a timely manner, that they are fleshed out with adequate detail and financial information so that we can make the proper financial decision that is in the best interest of the town of Acton and its taxpayers. Does anyone have any comments or suggestions on how we do that? Steve?
The warrant usually goes to the printer around St. Patrick's Day. I would say that at a minimum, any warrant articles should be to require our recommendation, and by that I mean ones that spend money, should be fully written and analyzed into us by March 1st, so that we have the time to investigate, carry out our warrant assignments, and make votes with the information and the wording that we are voting on to be final.
Yeah, I think that the other impact is not only the Finance Committee, but it's the taxpayers and the town meeting attendees that, we're dealing with a public or a population that is not, or that is either uninformed or poorly informed, and dependent on getting all their information about sometimes complex warrant articles at the town meeting itself. Can you present those complex issues, pro and con, plus or minus, in and out, the up and down, within 10, 15 minutes, that the people can make think about it, make a rational decision, and vote in their best interest. I don't think so.
Mr. Chairman, the other thing I might suggest is we may want to write up our own warrant commentary and post it on the website in advance. As Margaret has often pointed out correctly, if you just read the warrant, you miss the point of an awful lot of articles because they never have the amount in them, and you don't know whether they're talking about spending $100 or $10 million. Right.
So what is it that we're actually...
What's this article really all about?
Right.
I'm just going to add that, and I don't want to feed anybody else's fire here, but there has been a lot of complaining from people who were in opposition to some of the warrant articles, to the effect that the presenters and the pro side of the presentation would get the full measure of time available and generous allowances to run over the clock. But people who were opposed to it or were interested in pointing out weaknesses or concerns were given 2 minutes, period. And in some cases, the 2 minutes was strictly enforced. And their point was that this is undemocratic. If the town meeting is about an exchange of views, and you have an electronic podium and screens and computers and so on in the hands of people who represent only one point of view on a public issue, and the other folks have to get up and try and tackle it in 2 minutes, they're clearly at a disadvantage. Frankly, vigorous debate is the essence of democracy, and I think that they have a point. And so if we're going to talk about timelines in advance of the meeting, we also ought to be talking about how we're going to have our vigorous discussion, public discussion on the town meeting floor about the pros and cons of what's on the table. And that's an issue that no one has been willing to tackle. And I think that the Board of Selectmen, the Finance Committee, and the School Committee all have an interest in seeing that it's a perceptibly fair process, and it doesn't appear to be one now.
Is this not the purview of the town moderator?
It is, although the town moderator is a good listener. Any town moderator is if he's a good town moderator, is a good listener. And I think that if we take no position and we seem to have no viewpoint on whether or not there's an imbalance, and the Board of Selectmen also has no opinion about whether there's an imbalance, we shouldn't be surprised if the moderator doesn't take the issue seriously. it isn't necessary for the moderator to independently of the other sources of information like us and schools and the town. I mean, it's not incumbent on him to go out and out of whole cloth invent a whole solution to something if nobody's complaining about it. So I think if we have a concern, we should express it. And the person to express it to it ultimately is the town moderator, but also I think that our colleagues on the other committees should get some stimulation from us about whether or not they agree with the process as it stands, or whether there's some modifications that ought to be put in place. I think when those other entities are energized and come back to the town moderator, the moderator will be much more open-minded about making some adjustments.
In defense of the moderator, he has been in the past more than willing to have an opposition group make a presentation after the town board or committee makes theirs. However, he does have some pretty strict guidelines as to when he allows that, and usually it means they have to be to him well before town meeting. Right. They have to come to his pre-town meeting and go over the whole thing. There is no provision for spontaneous opposition, getting up and getting unlimited time to make a counter presentation. I don't know whether there should be or shouldn't be. I also know town meeting tends to go on too many nights, and we lose 3/4 of the people by the third night. So I think there's a delicate balance that has to be made. I think getting more information out about what's on the warrant earlier would allow people to take advantage of the fact that he will actually allow them to speak if they get to him in time.
Margaret.
Can I just make a suggestion that we table this topic, try to just quickly agree on if March 1st is the right amount of time for us to get any spending articles, fully, given to us by then, and then go home? But I'm happy, I'm actually going to be, just so everyone knows, since Mike is going to be out of town, I'm going to be just at least putting together the agenda for the next meeting, so let me know. I have a bunch of things I've already listed out, but let me know if you have other things. I'm happy to put this on the agenda as well if you want to talk about it.
One of the things to give Janet a heads up is the boards of selectmen for the Minuteman Regional Agreement. They're going to meet on the 17th or some day before, I think, our next. Aren't they going to meet together and have a vote?
Not that I'm aware of, no. We talked about having a reunion meeting once we're finished with the February town meetings, but no, it was a pretty intense, I think. It was mostly December, it was November and December, but I should tell you that the Board of Selectmen will be voting their recommendation on the warrant, which is posted with all the language in final form on the town website. They will be voting their recommendation at their next meeting, which is on the 25th. The town manager is going to be conducting a Q&A interview of the superintendent of Minuteman, sometime later this month. Right. And Pam Norris, who's Acton's representative on the Minuteman School Committee, and I are working on a public outreach session currently scheduled for Wednesday, the 27th, at the Public Safety Facility, which is the only room that's available other than on Friday. This room is available every Friday this month.
I guess my point is that the calendar is extremely tight prior to our special town meeting.
So what we're going to say at that meeting, we don't know yet because we haven't drafted anything. But no, as far as I know, there's not going to be a meeting. The meeting that we had, the 17th, was December. I think we met. That was our last meeting when we agreed to refer all of our recommendations to the Minuteman School Committee, which then in turn met on the 21st to recommend to all of the member towns. and now we have the special town meetings being called. And
Okay.
all I think I've called, I haven't heard for sure about Belmont, but I don't know, somebody's going to have to go
We'll
and,
flesh those out.
thanks.
Thank you.
So what about the March 1st?
What's that?
Should we vote on the March 1st thing?
Yeah, I think so.
So I move that we accept Steve's recommendation for this timeline of being March 1st, that we need to have any spending proposals to us by then, so we just won't be able to look at it and provide a recommendation to town meeting.
Second.
Okay. Any questions, comments?
Is there any stick if they fail? And what's the, this is
Well,
great.
just wouldn't
We
have a
recommend that you
we
do it
just
by
may not have a
1st.
recommendation
Yeah,
for
we
him.
wouldn't vote on the edit, and whatever those consequences are, they are what they are.
Or we simply could say, we don't have enough information to vote one way or another on this, town meeting members, and you don't either.
I just have quick comments. I remember very clearly on November the 3rd, when we were at the Public Safety Building, discuss and review the special town meeting warrants. I think every season, every member, FinCom member who had been on the committee for quite a while, all expressed the opinion that information was never enough. And I think we discussed this for quite a while. I think timeline is one thing, and complete information is also should be required.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's how I'm going to say.
We vote?
Margaret?
Oh, I just, do we vote?
Oh, yeah. So someone want to put that in the form of a motion?
I just,
She already did.
Okay.
And he seconded.
Okay, second.
Doug seconded it.
Comment, any other comments?
I would reinforce, we should make sure that that's in the motion. Sorry. We should make sure that that's in the motion, that we want to see that the information is sufficient. It is not enough to simply bring it out and say, well, here it is, with no numbers in it. They would be required, I think, under the intent of this, to give us, if not the actual number that's going to go in the warrant, then at least an estimate, so that we can deliberate ourselves in working whatever questions we need to work back to them.
We should just communicate it, they should be in their complete form with all required supporting numbers.
The numbers in some cases are simply not available, so if they give us an estimate, we can work with it.
Well, if the numbers are not available, why are they bringing it to town meeting?
No, the number may be subject to some factor that's beyond their control, but they will have a number by the town meeting. I think that
By March 1st.
simply rejecting it and saying that, I agree with Steve, frankly, that, you know, when there doesn't seem to be a good reason for it, then the Finance Committee is perfectly within its rights to say, as the advisory body to the town meeting, to say to the town meeting, we did not have enough information to deliberate on your behalf and to generate an opinion and a recommendation as to what you should vote on. And I don't necessarily have to go so far as to say, and you shouldn't vote on it either, but that's clearly implied, you know.
Right.
So we have that in our arsenal. But I'm trying to give them a little bit of wiggle room so that for those situations where the number simply won't be available by March 1st, that they can provide us with an estimate or the working range numbers and so on, so that we understand the orders of magnitude, then we could fashion some kind of a response. It needs to be tight, but it shouldn't be a stranglehold.
Well, you want to wordsmith that, what type of check?
We can just say it's sufficient information.
Right.
I mean, that's, right, I mean, I don't
Okay,
know. Let's just go ahead and vote on it, and, I
Okay,
mean,
all-
it's not like, you're just going to be communicating this with the board, so it's,
All in favor?
aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. I don't know how much more we want to go through this, any significant subcommittee updates? Roland?
So I've attended the last two CPA study committees, and I put together a summary kind of thing today. And basically, there's some things that the CPA study committee could do. They could recommend a blended CPA, which Littleton is doing right now. Wasn't much benefit to Acton, really. It'd be rolling in like the ACHC monies, but that would end up to be a one-time benefit, and you get a match on that. But it ties the hand of ACAC to be able to use the money that they get a appropriate by just going to the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Selectmen approves it or doesn't. You have to go and wait till the next town meeting. The other one is raising the percentages of the minimums that go into open space, historic preservation, or affordable housing. Currently, they're at each at 10% by the law. And if you do that, that kind of binds the CPA of every year. If you raise it to, like, say, 30% for each of those, then you have to put that 30% in. And it could be a year that you have a big project in historic, but, so it kind of creates a balancing issue. And it also limits the amount of money that can be bonded later on, because when the state looks at it, you want to do a bond against CPA, how much do you have that are going into those three areas? The other one was that they are looking at raising the surcharge from, currently it's at 1.5%, maybe going to 2 or 3. Committee's kind of split on that. Some things say, hey, you can go to 2, might not be such a bad deal. But they're saying, well, if you're going to go 2, you might as well go all the way to 3, so you get into the second and third rounds. Second and third rounds wouldn't really produce much for Acton, approximately about 40,000, I think, something like that. And the second and the third rounds are based on the affluency of the town. So somebody like Great Barrington, which has low property values, they could be at the full 3%, and they're still going to be lower than what Acton's going to bring in at 1.5. So that's how that kind of weighs. You get a little bit more in the first round, obviously. The other one was currently residences are first $100,000 of assessed value is exempt from CPA. Companies or commercial is not. And one of the things is if they go to 3%, do you then give the businesses a $100,000 exemption, or do you eliminate the $100,000 exemption from the residences? That anything like that was going to be, and that was going to happen. So they voted right now on not raising the percentages to go into 1, and not recommending that they go to the blended CPA. So the input, we're going to take a vote next time of what to raise it to, and and then give that recommendation to the Board of Selectmen. And they can do what they want to at that point. They've had input from open space and from recreation and historic and all the other entities that deal with that, and obviously open space like more money put aside, but it's going to be, I think if they go 3%, it's going to be a tough sell to town meeting myself, just rate what we discussed here tonight. It's actually, you see a CPA surcharge double, okay. So that's where we stand.
Good. Anyone else have anything to volunteer this night? Do I have another motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Aye. So Doug, I'm thinking about on the January 26th of actually putting the minutes first, so we get to them instead of, because we always end and we're not